Hello and welcome to another edition of The Complete Works. I am your host, Doug Hess. If you're tuning in to The Complete Works for the first time, welcome. What we do on this podcast is discuss a specific movie from a film actor, actress, director, or composer's film career. Currently, we're working our way through Nicolas Cage's film history. In this episode of The Complete Works, we're going to be looking at Arsenal, a 2017 release starring Nicolas Cage. John Cusack is also in that movie as well, in terms of that. If you'd like to find out more about the Complete Works podcast, you can go to film-book.com by using the search term The Complete Works. You can also email us at podcast@film-book.com with The Complete Works in the subject line. We'd love to hear from you. Not only in the subject line can you put The Complete Works, you can put the title of the movie that we're looking at, or Nicolas Cage. In terms of that, again, our email is podcast@film-book.com. And again, on this edition of The Complete Works, we're going to be looking at Arsenal. If you like what you're hearing here in this podcast, we'd strongly encourage you to hit the subscription buttons. That way, once we get another edition of The Complete Works up and running, we can have it delivered directly to your iPhone or your tablet and get an additional episode sent to you immediately so you can go ahead and tune in and start listening. Like I said, we're we're working our way through Nicolas Cage's film career. Arsenal is this edition of The Complete Works. And as we always do, we like to start off with a little bit of trivia. Talking a little bit of trivia in this. So Eddie King is played by Nicolas Cage, and his older brother, Buddy, is played by Christopher Coppola. Now, why is Christopher Coppola so important? Coppola is, in fact, the older brother of Nicolas Cage. So, Nicolas Cage was born Nicholas Kim Coppola, and if you know that name Coppola, you probably think of Francis Ford Coppola, the director of The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, to name a few others. That is the uncle to Nicolas Cage. So Nicolas Cage's older brother is actually in this movie as well. This is the third collaboration for Nicolas Cage and John Cusack. They have been in other movies. The first one was in 1997, Con Air, where Nicolas Cage plays a convicted felon who, whether or not he should have done time is in question. And then John Cusack is playing an FBI agent. Then in 2013, they were in the movie together, Frozen Ground, which, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, was based up in Alaska, based on a true story in terms of that. Audrey Gruner and Jonathan Cusack starred in a movie together. Another movie was written and directed by Stephen C. Miller, which was released by Lionsgate as well. So this is the second time that those two actors were actually in a movie together that was also written and directed by Stephen C. Miller. Now, the only difference is in here is Stephen C. Miller. He directed this movie, Arsenal, but he did not write it, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But Lionsgate did release both of these movies. The film unites the two lead actors from 8mm franchise. Nicolas Cage starred in that movie 8mm back in 1999, as well as Jonathan Cusack was in 88mm Part 2 back in 2005, in terms of that. Arsenal is also known as Southern Fury, and it's a 2017 American direct-to-video action thriller, which, as I said, was directed by Stephen Miller and was written by Jason Mosberg. In terms of this, what's really interesting about this particular film is the film stars Nicolas Cage, as we mentioned, and that's who we're talking about in here, but he is reprising his role from the 1993 movie Deadfall. Now, what is kind of interesting about this, and I don't want to give any spoilers away per se, but if you start looking at the sequel to the film Deadfall, which is Arsenal, Nicolas Cage plays the same character. Okay, but what's interesting is in this film exists despite the fact that Cage's character dies in Deadfall. So Deadfall came out in 1993. He's reprising this role in 2017, but you have to remember, if you saw the movie Deadfall, Nicolas Cage's character dies at the end of that particular movie. So again, I don't want to spoil anybody's movie if you've seen, or if you haven't seen Deadfall. Just a little FYI there. And as I mentioned, Lionsgate was the one that released this film. It was released on January the 6th, 2017. It had a budget of estimated about $10 million. The length of the movie is 97 minutes. And as I said, it was released on January the 6th, 2017 in terms of that. So let's kind of jump into a little bit of the movie here and talk a little bit about it. I have to be honest with you, a lot of the critics, myself included, was not a huge fan of this movie. Matter of fact, there was a lot of negative comments and reviews. Rotten Tomatoes, if you're a fan of that and you go out there and you look at the way that they rank the films, it only had a 3% ranking based on roughly 30 reviews. So overwhelming majority did not like this particular movie. Some other film critics that I went out there and just kind of took a look at, they were getting 25 out of 100 points. So again, well below what was needed to consider this kind of a good movie. A lot of times, obviously you want to come up with your own opinion, but if you start reading and you start looking at some of the other critics that are out there, and basically the overwhelming theme that I noticed when reading some of the other critics' overview of the movie Arsenal was that two things was happening. Well, really three things. One is Nicolas Cage's character, which is Eddie King. He plays a mobster, but if you ever seen the movie where and you have to forgive me, audience, I'm drawing a complete blank, but it was Jim Carrey played in the movie Man on the Moon. Sorry about that. Man on the Moon with Jim Carrey. He plays a character, it's a spin-off of another character called Tony Clifton. And if you are not familiar with Tony Clifton, I strongly encourage you to go see that movie, and you'll get the reference here. It's very important because that is exactly the character that comes to mind when you see Nicolas Cage, or at least when I saw Nicolas Cage in this particular movie. He looks like Tony Clifton, where he has this, you can definitely tell that he's wearing a wig. It's like somebody put a bowl over his head and just cut around the bowl. He wears dark sunglasses, and he has a wide lapel lounge singer-style jacket that he's wearing, and it just comes across as kind of weird, if you will. The other thing that I found out about the movie, or I found about the movie, is it felt like that the director never allowed Nicolas Cage, Stephen Miller was the director, never really allowed Nicolas Cage to be Nicolas Cage. It was like they were trying to pin him up, and I also would say that they were trying to keep him, in check. But I also think that the director was kind of competing against Nicolas Cage. In one particular episode that comes to mind is how many times can a car keep blowing up based on different angles that it was looking at. and it just felt like the director was trying to compete with with an actor. Now, what's interesting enough, Nicolas Cage, Eddie King, Nicolas Cage plays Eddie King in the movie. He is really not what I'm going to refer to as, I don't want to say the main character, but more of the character in focus. And so it was really weird that you have, obviously, a big name, Nicolas Cage, Cusack is in the movie. But I honestly just felt like the director was competing against the two of them and really kind of putting them in their place. And the director, Stephen Miller, wanted to be the one that was shining. Now, you might ask, what other movies did Stephen Miller direct? Silent Night is the one that really comes to mind to me. And like I said, it was just really hard to stay focused in the movie. So, what is the movie about exactly? So, here's a quick overview of the movie. A powerful action thriller is what this is. And when I say powerful action thriller, I'm being nice because it has Nicolas Cage in it. It is an action thriller, powerful. Again, I'm trying to be nice here, but Arsenal really tells the intertwining stories of some brothers, Mickey and J.P. Lindell, who had only each other to rely on growing up. So as adults, J.P. found success as an owner of a construction company, while Mickey becomes a small-time mobster, mirrored in the life of basically petty crime. When Mickey is kidnapped and held for ransom by a ruthless crime boss, Eddie King, a.k.a. Nicolas Cage, J.P. turns to his brother's old pal, Sal, which is played by John Cusack, who is a plainclothes detective who is looking to help the family. In order to rescue his brothers, JP must risk everything and unleash his vengeance against King's ruthless army of gangsters. Something I was trying to put together based on this, the movie. What's really interesting is basically that plot or storyline that I just read to you is kind of like the same storyline that you see in a lot of movies. It's just copy and paste. The only difference is you have a couple of big name actors in it. Like I said, John Cusack, Nicolas Cage is in there, etc. But I really never really found that the movie was able to let go, and you really could see what Nicolas Cage could do. I don't want to harp on this too much, and I really don't want to get down this rabbit hole. But really, you just don't see Nicolas Cage being able to do what Nicolas Cage does in this movie. And I would say that goes the same for John Cusack as well in the film. That neither one of them was really allowed to be themselves, really get involved in the role and act. Again, I think they were competing against the director. I don't want to beat that horse to death too much, but I really believe that that's what was going on within the movie in terms of that. So a little bit more about the movie. It opens up with characters, like I said, growing up in their teens. They're playing on the streets where there's crime, there's baseball, but however, the brothers are looking out for one another. And then Mickey gives his lawn mowing jobs to JP and later protects him when an uncle commits suicide. Then from there, the film really moves to when they're adults and Mickey gets out of jail. JP is, at that point, like I said earlier, is running a successful construction company. The family starts to celebrate on the 4th of July. And that's when Mickey, his wife and daughter, Alexis, being the dysfunctional family that they are, JP and his family decide who is more of a normal American family, to kind of help Mickey out. JP and the family loans Mickey $10,000 for braces for his daughter Alexis. But guess what? Mickey goes out, buys drugs, tries to flip a quick buck or two, make some profit, and in the meantime, guess what? The drugs get hacked. With Rusty, the prime suspect, Mickey is out not only the drugs, but he's also out the money as well. Enter sleazeball mobster Eddie King, a.k.a., in this sense, Nicolas Cage. And he decides that he's going to kidnap Mickey and expects his brother, JP, to pay the $350,000 ransom in order to free Mickey, his brother, JP's brother, Mickey. As you can imagine, Mickey is beat up with pictures sent and the demands are made. JP and friends, or his friend, shouldn't say friends, but his friend Sal, played by John Cusack, goes into action trying to free Mickey. And really, from there, it's just another typical movie that unfortunately does not really pan out the way that you think the movie should. In terms of that, the concept of the film, I think, is good. It's just I just don't think the actors were allowed to really do what they wanted or could do, and which could have made this film a lot better. The other thing is, I also thought that the film was pretty predictable. I kind of said that a few minutes ago, where they just kind of copied and pasted the film in there. I really believe that that's exactly what happened in terms of that. Not literally, but my point is that there wasn't really anything new or exciting in this film that made me go, wow. And I guess that's why it was sent directly by Lionsgate to DVD. Even though it was released on January the 6th, it went directly to Video Action in terms of that. So I didn't have a chance to go to the theater in order to do that. I told you it was about a $10 million estimate budget. Unfortunately, it did not do very well at all. It didn't even come close to making back its estimated budget, which is roughly about $10 million, like I mentioned, in terms of that, which is kind of unfortunate with the fact that you had a couple, pretty big names in there, Nicolas Cage and John Cusack. What would I rank the movie overall out of a 10? 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. I would give it probably a 3, and that was being very generous. I really wanted to give it a much lower number. I was really thinking about a 2, but being the nice guy that I am, 3 in terms of that. So it wasn't the best film of Nicolas Cage's career in terms of that. If you remember, last week we were looking at An Army of One. I have to say that I think it was better than last week's movie, An Army of One, which was roughly based on a true story. But I have to admit, this was also right there as being a film that ranks a close second, being a tough movie to watch for a couple of different reasons. One is I think it was the predictability. But number 2 is that the characters really didn't speak to me. I thought they were really being restrained. And like I said, and again, I'll leave it alone here, but I really think that the director and the actors were trying to compete against each other, or let me say it this way, the director was competing with the actors in terms of that. Okay? Well, I want to thank you for listening to this episode of The Complete Works, where we were reviewing the movie Arsenal, starring Nicolas Cage. You can find more about the film or our work on the films at film-book.com. Again, that's film-book.com. You can just search for Doug Hess or The Complete Works. You can also find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. Again, that's HessDoug at 14 is my Twitter account. If you're listening to this podcast on iTunes or another podcast service, we'd ask that you please rate and review the episode. If you're listening on podcast on your YouTube channel, a FilmBook podcast, please like us. Please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and leave us a comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you in terms of that. Again, tune in next time for another Nicolas Cage film when we review and analyze a film. We thank you for listening, and again, please go out there and get a hold of us. Send us an email, like us, send us a review, and we'd like to thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. I didn't. So again, I would say overall, I would give this film more of a 3 instead of a 5. I did see where some of the critics actually gave this even a lower than a 5. One critic from Slate magazine actually gave it a 1.5 out of 4 stars and commented that the film had a few thrilling moments, but its pleasure are fleeting and always balanced by oppression, ugliness. It really is even deeper dive into the smile between chaos rather than compassion and contentment. So across the board, I would say that most people had it at a 5 or lower, which means that only about 50% actually enjoyed the movie. I'm going to be honest, I was not one that really enjoyed it. Matter of fact, about halfway through the movie, I was looking at my watch saying, how much longer do I have to watch this show? In terms of that, let's just give me an honest review. Again, even though it's got some actors with names in it, I just wanted to get it over with, personally, in terms of that. So, some other information about the film. The film was the closing entry for the director's fortnight section of the 2016 Cannes Film Festival. In terms of that, the principal photography of the film began on October the 19th, 2015 in Cleveland, Ohio. Filming also took place in Sheffield Lake, and it ended on November the 23rd, 2015. And like I said, they only took 25 days to shoot the film, and most of the crew were recent film graduates in terms of that. It was released on November the 4th, 2016 in the United States. Again, on May 20th of 2016, it was at the Cannes Film Festival. In terms of budget, I had did some research on that. It looked like they had a budget of approximately $40 million, but it didn't even make $1 million back at the box office. So it was basically a bust from the start. Like I said, I didn't enjoy the movie. I thought it was at times very painful to watch, even though you've got two great actors in there. You know, Nicolas Cage can be spotty at times, but overall, I think he's a great actor. William Dafoe, like I said, 3 or 4 different movies that come to my mind immediately with him in it, and I found him to be just a very good actor as well. But in this particular movie, Dog Eat Dog, it was a flop in my opinion, and really a disappointment, to be honest with you, in terms of that. So, not that it didn't have its great moments at times, but overall, it was just flat for me. And it's actually kind of hard to talk about it, to be honest with you, because I didn't enjoy it that much in terms of that. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going to give the benefit out of the doubt in terms of that. So, sorry for the poor review on terms of that, but I'm just trying to give you my honest opinion and feedback. Again, like I said, I wish I would have taken the time to have read the book first, but I didn't, and that's fine in terms of that. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode of The Complete Works as we work our way through the Nicolas Cage movie history. This film was Dog Eat Dog. You can find out more of our work on film-book.com. Just search for Doug Hess or the complete works. You can also find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. Again, that's HessDoug at 14. If you're listening to podcasts or on iTunes or another podcast service, please rate us, review, like the episode. And if you're listening to podcasts on your YouTube channel, FilmBook Podcast, please like us on our video. And again, subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment in the comment section. Send us an email. We would love to hear from you. Get your take on this podcast or on others. Again, if you like what you hear, we encourage you to like the podcast. Hit the subscription button so every week we can go ahead and have that signed up to you, or sent to you, I should say. Feel free to email us at podcast@film-book.com. Again, that's podcast@film-book.com. In the subject line, write the complete works, episode 77, Dog Eat Dog, whatever. Get our attention. We'd love to hear from you in terms of that. So we're going to ask you to tune in next time when we review and analyze the next Nicolas Cage film. We thank you for listening. We'll see you then. Take care, everyone. McVeigh for all charges on October the 30th. For all the charges on October the 30th in 2000. So some 60-some years later, 50, 60-some years later, President Clinton exonerates Captain McVeigh in terms of that. And so basically it was that pressure that got to him. And that's how the film really ends, is that Captain McVeigh just really couldn't take the torture, if you will. I hope I can say it that way, from the harassment. And it was just a terrible thing. I mean, I can't imagine being in the captain's position, but I cannot also imagine being one of the loved ones that lost a husband or a father or a brother in this event, or a son. And I could see both sides of this. And like I said, Captain McVeigh just really couldn't take the pressure, and unfortunately commits suicide from the harassment, for lack of a better word, in terms of that. Now, what's interesting, there's always a subplot in films like this. I shouldn't say always, but a lot of times. And basically we have two childhood friends, Indianapolis diver Brian Bam Smithwicks and a crew member, Mike Delanto. Long story short, both of these individuals fall in love with the same woman without the other knowing. So both of them are in love with the same woman. Neither one of them really knows it. D'Anto purchased an engagement ring before the trip, and he is going to propose. Who tells? The trip. Basically, long story short, again, the two of them get into it, a brawl involving two of the crewmen. So D'Anto loses the ring, and one of the other crew members, Alvin, steals it after the ship is destroyed. Smithwick and D'Anto spend the next few days in the sea with the rest of the crew, where D'Anto succumbs to massive leg injuries received in a shark attack, and Smithwick is given the engagement ring by Alvin. Band proposes to Antonio's fiancée Claire to help raise their child, and she accepts their proposal. While the credit rolls, two Navy sailors re-encounter the sharks in the water, and the real rescue footage is shown along with many still shots of the lost sailors in the Pacific Ocean at that day. Just a really terrible situation based on a true story and event. So the question then becomes Nicolas Cage and his performance in the USS Indianapolis. I thought he was okay. I mean, I would say that, like I've said in so many of these, it wasn't his best, but I wouldn't say it was his worst. I would, on a scale 1 to 10, I'm a little bit more down the middle. I would lean towards a 6, maybe even a 6.5 out of a 10 in terms of that. Just because, well, I'm a history buff, and I really love those types of movies, and so I would give him the benefit of the doubt. Like I said, though, it wasn't one of his worst performance by no means, but it wasn't one of his best either. So I'm going to go somewhere between a 6.5 in terms of that. Like I said, others with Rotten Tomato only gave it a 17. But again, that was based only on 11 reviews. I stick by my earlier comments regarding the USS Indianapolis, in the sense that the USS Indianapolis is one of those historical events that's out there, but a lot of people just don't know the story. If it wasn't for the movie Jaws in 1975, I think even fewer people would understand or have any historical reference regarding the USS Indianapolis in terms of that. We see that on February the 5th, 2015, Nicolas Cage was set to play the lead role of Captain McVeigh in the film. We see that Matt Lanter was set on April the 1st, 2015 to play U.S. Navy diver Chief Petty Officer Brian Bam Smithwick. Lanter revealed to the producers after his audition that his grandfather, Kinley Lantern, was a signalman on the Indianapolis. Furthermore, Lantern's father, Joe Lantern, is a chairman of the Second Watch, an organization of survivors and their families. Joe Lantern and his co-chair, Mario Bullard, stayed in contact with the producers during pre-production and were welcomed to the set during the photography. Then on May the 13th, 2015, it was revealed that Tom Sizemore, Thomas Jane, and Brian Presley would also join the cast for the film in terms of that. On July the 15th, 2015, Cody Walker was cast in the film to play one of the crewmen aboard the ship. And like I said, that was his acting debut in terms of that. See here, principal photography on the film began on June the 19th, 2015 in Mobile, Alabama, with many of the scenes shot aboard the battleship USS Alabama, which I discussed earlier, that was to take place or be to be in place of the Indianapolis. Filming also took place in San Francisco and over in Japan, but the producers later opted to double Mobile for both San Francisco and Japan in terms of that. And then on June the 27th, 2015, filming was underway in Orange Beach in terms of that for the film. After filming on July the 14th in downtown Mobile, Nicolas Cage met a real Navy veteran named Richard Stevens on a beach at Peneville Square. Stevens was one of the survivors of the ship USS Indianapolis. So Cage and Stevens had a long talk about the disaster, and I'm sure got a much deeper appreciation for the story and the events that those brave individuals went through. Again, what a terrible tragedy in history, and I just can't imagine what it would have been like floating in the ocean for 5 days with no food, with no water, no protection from the sun. Oh, and by the way, I'm surrounded by sharks that want to eat me because of everybody's injuries and the blood, et cetera, in terms of that. So, overall, like I said, Personally, I'm going to give this film a 6 out of a 10. One, just because I'm a little partial to history, but at the same time, I think it's a great story to tell. One thing I'm not too keen on is, but I understand why people do it. I understand why Hollywood does it, is to kind of bring the love story in the mix. I get it. It sells tickets. It's something that they want, they need. I get that. And so, it is what it is in terms of that. Okay? Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to this episode of The Complete Works. We were discussing the film The USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, starring Nicolas Cage, that was released in 2016. You can find out more of my work on film-book.com. You can search my name, Doug Hess, or you can search The Complete Works. You can find me on Twitter at HessDoug14. And we thank you for listening. We encourage you, if you like what you've heard, to subscribe so we can have the podcast sent to you directly. And again, if you have any comments, you feel free to email us at podcast@film-book.com. Again, that's podcast@film-book.com. In the subject line, you can put in The Complete Works. You can put in the USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, or any of the other films that we're talking about. Again, we strongly encourage you to hit the subscription button. And until next week on The Complete Works, have a great week, everyone, and we'll talk to you next week. That the audience was more willing to give the praise to the actor or actresses in the movie, but was a little standoffish when it came to the actual film. In terms of that, the audience polled by Cinema Score gave the film an average grade of A, on an A+ to an F. However, Stone works best when it's just Edward and the three journalists in the hotel room sweating it out, because they were deciding what they were going to release, when they were going to release it, etc. in terms of that. But for the actual material of the film, I think a lot of people, like I said, were just a little standoffish or a little squeamish. Now, let's fast forward to 2019, and with the current political climate that is out there, I'm not so sure that this film wouldn't get a much stronger praise from some of the critics when you're looking at the actual material, not the acting, but the message that's there. I think you'd probably have things a little bit different today in 2019 versus 2016, but I could be wrong on that. And again, like I said, I don't want to make this about politics. This is not the podcast for that. And if you're looking for that, there's other podcasts for you to join. I just want to stay with the entertainment value when it comes to with movies and Nicolas Cage, or The Complete Works in general, of whoever that we're talking about, an actor, actress, director, composer, etc. And let you, the audience, come up with your own thoughts and take on that. Okay? Well, that wraps up another edition of The Complete Works. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes or another podcast service, please, we encourage you to rate and review this episode. If you're listening to this podcast on the YouTube channel, FilmBook Podcast, please like us, our video, and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. And we just ask that you tune in next time when we review and analyze the next Nicolas Cage film. We want to thank you for listening. And again, if you like what you hear, please hit subscribe so we can have future editions of the podcast, The Complete Works, sent directly to you. Love to hear from you as well. Send us an email if you have any thoughts, comments, or concerns. And you can do that at podcast@film-book.com. and in the subject line, put in the complete works, Snowden, or any of the other other movies that we have been reviewing. And we hope to see you next time. So again, thanks for listening to the complete works. This has been an episode on Nicolas Cage, and the movie that we reviewed for Nicolas Cage was Snowden. So until next time, take care.